Wealth management is not just for the wealthy. Everyone is entitled to their best retirement possible. Welcome to The Retirement Engineer with Jim Kruzan, your path to a bigger, bolder retirement. Brought to you by Kaydan Wealth Management, a firm that specializes in serving the mobility technology industry. In this podcast, we help you maximize your resources and engineer your best retirement through a process-driven approach so you can get the little things right. Drawing from years of expertise, Jim and his guests will simplify complex wealth management strategies and explore actionable ideas to help you protect your hard-earned wealth and take control of your future. Now, on to the show.
When it comes to retirement planning, we often focus on the financial aspects, building wealth, securing investments, and ensuring a stable income. But what about where you live, what you do, and whom you do it with? Well, in this episode, we're shifting gears to explore sides of retirement planning that are just as important, if not more. I'm Patrice Sikora, alongside your host, Jim Kruzan, and today we're joined by Dr. Jacquelyn B. James, the founding director of the Sloan Research Network on Aging and Work, and past co-director of the Center on Aging and Work at Boston College. Stay tuned as Jackie helps us uncover the keys to a fulfilling and happy retirement beyond the numbers. Jim?
Well, thanks, Patrice. As we've discussed many times before, we here at Kaydan Wealth kind of refer to ourselves as retirement engineers. Our view of that is we kind of meld both industry as well as financial knowledge, kind of creativity, and we design, engineer, and maintain what we deem to be bigger, bolder retirements. And along the way, we've certainly discovered that it's much more than just the money. It's not just the dollar signs. There's a confluence of other aspects, other items to consider. And that's really why we have our guests today. And just in terms of formal introduction, Dr. Jacquelyn B. James, as we learned before, is the founding director of that Sloan Research Network on Aging and Work, which I find just incredibly interesting. She's also the past director of the Center for Aging and Work, also at Boston College. And she's dedicated her entire career to studying the intersection of aging, work, and retirement, and brings a wealth of knowledge on how individuals can prepare psychologically as well as socially for this significant life transition. We're thrilled to have you here today to share your insights and expertise. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really nice to be with you. And I appreciate so much that you are thinking beyond the financial aspects of retirement.
Well, for a numbers guy like me, when we think about retirement, sadly, it's sort of a stitch in time. It's sort of a date. It's the portrayal of a kind of a distinct one-time event. But we know the reality of it is it's much more complex, and it's much more of a gradual transition. Can you explain what retirement truly means in today's context, how that might be a bit different than 40 or 50 years ago, and how it's evolving for current retirement eligible adults, and why defining this whole thing called retirement is so challenging?
Well, yes, you made all the right points there. It's changed significantly since the evolution of Social Security. When that Social Security Act was enacted, it only passed, I think, because a lot of people thought, well, very few people will use it right, because they won't live long enough, and if we make it the target age 65, maybe people will live 5 years. A lot of people won't live to then. So that what has changed is just about everything. People are living longer, and people used to have pensions, which usually set a retirement date by which they then got money every month for the rest of their lives. And over time, we have changed to what we call defined contribution plans. Not everybody enrolls in one because they haven't fully appreciated the fact that their retirement income will not be taken care of. And people are healthier than they used to be. We have medical interventions now that make heart disease less the death penalty, and strokes have decreased a lot with all the medications that we have. So people are living into the 80s, 90s, and my mother just died at 104.
Oh my goodness. How magnificent. How wonderful.
Yeah. And she was retired as a public school teacher. And I think she collected a pension for something like 45 years.
So literally, she probably collected a pension for a longer period of time than she was acting as a professional in her career of choice.
She actually did. And she probably collected more money than she ever put into it also.
Yeah. Mathematically, we all know that's impossible, right? Yeah. It creates some stresses within that system as well. Egads. Wonderful. That's terrific.
And so for all those reasons, it's hard for people to think about retirement. A lot of people don't have the money at age 65 it's hard to work for 30 years and save enough money to educate a family and then have retirement income for 30 more years. It's just a really hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people need to work longer financially. Mm-hmm. But even people who are financially situated for retirement, many of them want to continue working. They're healthy. They're still vibrant. They love their jobs. A lot of people have gotten into a place in their careers that they wanted to be for a long time by the time they reach these ages, and they don't want to give it up. And they don't see any reason to give it up. And it never hurts to continue adding to your income. And also it helps you to delay your Social Security benefit taking, because the more you put into it, the more you get if you delay until age 70, for example.
Oh, absolutely. For sure.
So a lot of people want to work longer. We live in a work identified culture in the first place. And in the second place, people are more educated in the cohort that's now in retirement. And they have gotten, as I said, to jobs that they want to keep. And work confers many benefits. It's many people, it's their social world. And it provides structure for the day. It's a reason to get up in the morning and know that there's something you have to go and do and that you're needed that day. It's also people's identity. And so to think about giving up all that is really hard for a lot of people. It's a source of self-esteem for people. It's the first thing people ask you when they're meeting you, for the first time. What is it that you do?
Right.
And people have talked to me about not wanting to answer that question with, I'm retired. It's also
interesting. Yeah.
It's kind of become an ugly word anyway.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
When I ask people, they say, I'm retired, but, and then
that's
long list of things they're into. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Then we typically exclude everything in front of the but, right? So then we really get into what they used to do for a living or what their passions are, which is really probably a much more interesting conversation to begin with, right? A couple of interesting takeaways. I know all about the Social Security Act and, when it was enacted and what those benefits looked like back then. But it's interesting as a reminder to think about the fact that, hey, prior to that, there really wasn't any kind of structured retirement. And as a result, it wasn't in anybody's vocabulary. People just didn't think about retiring. They just worked until they could no longer work. That was always kind of the case. And then,
Well, except for the people who did have pensions, and a lot more people did in those days. Right. If you work for a company, again, in the olden days, people went to work at one place and stayed for 30 years or 40 years, and they did get a pension. But a lot of jobs did not provide pensions.
Right.
Farmers in particular were known for working until they dropped.
One of the interesting stats that I read not that long ago had to do with those who are retired that are over the age 75. In fact, that cohort is the fastest growing segment of retirees. And I think it's something like 19% of all people over that age still are working, quotation marks, in some capacity. Right. Maybe not at their same job. Maybe they're doing something with less stress. Maybe they're doing something that's more advocationary, a hobby or something that they transitioned. But it's really interesting that you have that
segment of the labor market, actually.
Yeah. Isn't it? That's amazing. Starting my career 40 some years ago, boy, somebody 75 was old. Yes. You wouldn't anticipate that person still having a fulfilling career. But it's really interesting because when you watch television and they bring in these experts, somebody who's an expert in medicine or military, and then you would Google them or kind of look at their bio. They're 83 years old. They're 79 years old. They're at the apex of their career and authority in many cases. So that's really very, very, very interesting. One thing I've always thought, because there is this disconnection with what work was, cohorts and all that in this whole transition, is it, I'm kind of thinking out loud, but doesn't it make sense, or shouldn't we have more of those types of conversations in the traditional wealth management, financial planning environment? I thought if I could go back in time and build the perfect practice, I probably would want to have a psychologist on staff who has deep experience in this intersection to be able to spend 2 hours or so with every single client who's about to go into this journey called retirement, to bring up issues, to talk about what that transition looks like. Sadly, not all of us, and I don't know any who are really embracing that and doing that. In lieu of that, what are some of the resources and some of the things that we as practitioners might be able to use, tools that we can use to kind of guide our clients through these kinds of questions?
Well, first of all, I think that's really smart to make that part of your portfolio. We argue that you have to think about your financial portfolio and also your social portfolio. And I argue that we need to be really careful over the lifespan, really, that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. So for someone who's completely devoted to their career to the exclusion of everything else, I would be wanting to advise them to diversify and make sure that there's time for family, and make sure that there's time for community, and make sure that there's time to pursue things other than work, because we know that all of those things make you a better employee as well as a happier person. Mm. And then when you have done that, if you have done that throughout your life, then there are things that you have started or gotten involved in or tried that you can deepen in retirement when you have more time. And you asked the question, how long before retirement should you be thinking about this? And I really think you should be thinking about it over all of your life. Not retirement per se, but the extent to which you have a diverse portfolio of things that are important to you in your life.
Well, that would be true regardless of whether we're talking about retirement or not. It's more about being a whole person, creating some balance between work and family and faith and community and friendship, right? Mm-hmm. And those that get it probably have a much easier transition to whatever that next step is. Those that don't or are lacking or in some of those areas probably find it far more difficult.
Yeah, what we find is that most people who do well in retirement, and most people do, but the people who do best in retirement are people who have already been involved in things that they can deepen, they can get more involved. It's really hard if you wait till your retirement to figure out what you want to do volunteer-wise or community-wise or anything, because the roadmap isn't there. There's ageism. And if you haven't already been building those relationships, those avenues, those places to get involved, it's much harder to do when you're retired. It's not impossible, but it is harder.
Although I'm not a psychologist, I certainly play one on TV, and I've had many a conversation with clients. Nothing super deep, but certainly from the standpoint of I can remember this one client in particular who they're just a great couple, very loving. He was a skilled tradesman, worked for a large auto manufacturer, and through his whole career, call it 35 plus years working in a factory, he had always taken every bit of overtime he could get. If he could work weekends, he'd work weekends. And we got to a point where he was starting to consider retirement. Not necessarily because he thought it was time, but the workplace was no longer enjoyable because all of his friends have left. Mm-hmm. So that becomes the modus operandi of, okay, maybe I should do the same. And we started talking about it. And clearly from a financial point of view, he's fine. The numbers work. They work forward, they work backward. Let's inject some catastrophe into it. It works just fine. But he had absolutely nothing to retire to. And we went for 2 years where he'd come in and say, okay, I think I'm ready to retire. And then he'd kind of walk out because the assignment was, figure out a hobby. Tell me what it is you're going to do in retirement. Mm-hmm. So finally, we got to a point where I don't know if he actually did this or whether he made it up just so that I would stop nagging him, but he came up with things that he was going to do, because I can only imagine, because you see it, don't you? You see people who work all the time. That's their whole being. That's what they seem is most important to them. And then they retire in a vegetative state, the old Archie bunker, the easy chair in front of the television. And then we're surprised that they pass away 18 months later. Yeah. Because there's nothing else in their life. That's really interesting. I like your analogy. I think I read that where you said something like retirement is not like jumping off a diving board. It's more of a process and it takes time. And I thought that was really interesting because
and one way to do that with your client even would have been to say to approach management and say, I'm thinking about retirement, but I'd like to take a couple of years to do it, and I'd like to scale back and work less, and that would give me more time to try things and figure out how well it's going to go for me. And a lot of employers these days are open to those kinds of arrangements.
Absolutely. My practice is really kind of niche-y. We work pretty much exclusively with engineers and scientists. Yeah. Most of our practice is involved in mobility technology. So think of that as men and women who design, engineer, and manufacture modes of technology that move people or things from one location to another. So they're usually very technical in their expertise, and companies are waking up to the fact that an abrupt retirement leaves a big void, in skill set knowledge. So they're becoming more creative, and even their retirement packages are allowing people to do kind of a mentorship program where they're transitioning the skill set, as opposed to, hey, I'm letting my boss know I'm retiring in 60 days. He's going to have to interview for a job, plug somebody in who is still doing their job until I retire, and then they're learning the job on the fly. How unproductive is that? So it's really interesting.
Another thing organizations are doing too is having former employees be come in for projects, 6 months of this or 3 months of that, and some employees are making like they call a senior core with a whole list of those types of people who are interested in coming back every now and then they get the benefits of work and then of the freedom that retirement affords. So there are all kinds of creative ways to ease into retirement today in ways that we didn't have years ago. And it took a long time for employers. This has been part of my work, is to convince employers of the value of this. And a lot of employers were not very open to it in the beginning, but are now. And it's partly because it's so hard to get the kind of workers they need these days.
Right. Also for financial reasons, sometimes as they're doing a headcount reduction, that then reduces the stress on their income statement.
Correct.
They will backfill with consultants or temporary hires, and we've had great success in transitioning some very, very skilled employees who took the retirement, saw it as somewhat of an opportunity, but then immediately transitioned into consulting, either under their own LLC or hiring as a W-2 employee, some other firm. And in many cases, they're back at the same job, same location, in some cases sitting at the same desk, but they're no longer on Ford or GM or somebody's payroll. They're working for a different firm. And that workforce is a lot more flexible, right? They can increase or decrease the size of that very, very rapidly. So that's a whole cottage industry that's been somewhat created, right? It's a way, and it's a great way for people to somewhat transition into retirement as well. Well, let's talk about retirement for a second. So the big day comes, and then what? I've heard this term of kind of a honeymoon or kind of an afterglow, kind of right after retirement. What exactly is that, and how long does something like that last?
Yeah, I think there's data showing that there is a honeymoon and that it is about a year, sometimes two. It's sort of like going on vacation for a year.
Yeah.
And doing all the things that you didn't have time to do when you were working so hard, and just enjoying that freedom. And then that gets tiresome. Yeah. I was at a conference once with a woman who was trying to work with retired faculty in colleges and universities to get involved in community politics, volunteering. And I said, don't you get pushback? Like, I've worked my whole life. This is my time. I want to do, nothing. I want to put my feet up. She said, no, I don't, because I wait a year. I wait a year after they've retired, and then I approach them, and I hardly ever get any pushback.
That's funny. We're going to talk about specifically that a little bit later on, because I find that whole thing kind of interesting as well. So I just came off of a week or so vacation, and we were with my wife's sisters and their husbands, and one sister and her husband are both retired, and I had asked my brother-in-law. I said, "So tell me, what was the most enjoyable thing about retirement?" And this goes along with that honeymoon thing. And he said, the most enjoyable thing was getting up in the morning, making a pot of coffee, sitting down and reading my newspapers and reading my phone and finishing the pot of coffee. Because for 40 years, I'd have that automatic coffee maker on. I'd be rushing in the kitchen. I'd be pouring it into a carry-all cup, and I'm out the door. And just the fact that I've got nothing else going on and I can enjoy my space for a 2-hour period. And I thought, wow, that sounds really good.
That resonates with me too.
Yeah, you're right. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, that's really kind of interesting. But I imagine at some point the honeymoon fades, and then we get into the stark reality of, wow, I've got all this time. How am I going to fill it? What am I going to do? I hope, some of those questions get answered before retirement, before the event. But what do those other phases kind of look like? And how do people kind of navigate through that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think retirement is something that has to be navigated and adapted to over and over again, because everything changes. Health changes. You get older. You have more issues. People die. There are losses. It requires an incredible amount of flexibility, openness to experience, and willingness to look at what's going on and figure out what one needs to do differently to continue to be happy and living a meaningful life. And so I think people get invited to be on a board, for example, and then it's a 3-year term, and then that's over. They have to again figure out something else. And the world is always turning. And so it's just really the main thing to realize is that the only thing you can expect is change. Everything's going to change all the time. We just got called this morning from friends who are feeble, and we haven't been before. And now we have to change our relationship with them because we're going to be more in the caretaking role. So I just think the expectation that we have to adapt to a lot of change in retirement is important. But it's also important, as you have been talking about earlier, that we do know more about what makes us happy and what keeps us going and what makes us feel important and useful. Everybody needs to feel needed and important. And that's the thing that the work so conferred, especially in jobs like the ones in that you service in your organization. So I think it's really important to try new things. A lot of people want to paint. Some people want to write a book. I told a story. This was in an AARP magazine years ago, where a man in New Orleans ran an auto repair shop for his whole life. And he wasn't even 60, I don't think, when he started thinking, I'm going to sell this thing. I can't keep doing this. Just physically, he couldn't keep doing it. So he lived in New Orleans. He loved music, and he wanted to play the guitar. So he literally, at the age of 50-something, started taking guitar lessons. And people said he took his guitar everywhere he went. And at the time of the writing of this article, he was playing gigs in New Orleans jazz bands.
Amazing.
And it was just such a happy story. And there were other examples in that same story. And there are examples that I've collected over my career. I have really good friends who both retired completely financially secure, went on a safari and ran across a small town in Tanzania where there was an AIDS orphanage. And there were 9 AIDS orphans in this cement block building. They were being taken care of by a couple who didn't have children of their own. They didn't have any food. It was a really dire situation. So these friends went to the market, got a whole bunch of rice and beans and corn, and got to know this couple and started fundraising for this AIDS orphanage, which they then fundraised and built a new orphanage. Then they built a school, Then they built a middle school, and most recently they've built a high school. And this is something people could Google and find out more about. It's called the Precious Project, and it's in Tanzania, and it's just been a huge success. And this just came out of their exploring life, traveling, doing what people do when they're retired, and they just said we couldn't not do it. And I think if people are out trying things, they run across things where they feel a need that they can fill. And when they feel it, that's fulfilling for them too.
Don't you think it's sometimes difficult for people to self-reflect, to really get an idea? Because we're so busy, we're on this treadmill, imaginary or not, and we just never take the time. We're always rushing, and yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of psychologists out there that have their calendars full of people they talk to every day who are trying to search for happiness and search for meaning. For those who are much more mathematically in tune, their, what is that, left or right brain? I'm not quite sure. It might be a little bit more difficult. That has got to be a bit of a challenge.
And you know what? I don't think reflection is the only answer. I mean, I think trying things, doing things,
just get out and do it.
Yeah, just try something. Get involved in something that you don't. And you mentioned in your preparation for this with me that, you know, you have to be careful that you don't get into something that you can't get out of. That's just like another obligation that you don't want to be responsible for. But there are ways to dip your toe in the water and things and figure out. I started out teaching. When I first retired, I was asked to teach a course at this Unitarian church that I belong to. And I thought, here we go. I'm going to be just as busy and just as tired and just as stressed. But I did one class, and then I decided whether I wanted to do more. And it has been so rewarding for me. I've really enjoyed it. But if I had not, I would have backed away from that and said, no, thank you. I think you can find someone else to do the rest of this. But it's really important to just put your toe out there and try. Some people want to learn to play the piano, or like I just said, the guitar, or paint, or write a book, or do something they've always wanted to do but didn't have time to do. Those are the kinds of things that I would ask people to think about. In some ways, just sitting back in a therapist chair and reflecting, I don't think gets it, especially for technocrats and people who have that rational mind.
So you can't just say, okay, I'm going to carve out 30 minutes of think time and figure all this stuff out. No. That just doesn't work.
Well, I don't think it's not that it doesn't work. I think it's important to do it if that works for you.
Yeah.
And you do have to do a certain amount of thinking to think about reflecting, to think about what it is you'd like to try, right, or how you'd like to get out of the house and do something, or what you'd like to do. But
I think
it's important to have active, real things that you're working toward.
So what I heard is two takeaways. One, embrace change, because there will be a lot of it. There's no such thing as saying, hey, I just retired and we just nailed down, locked in this retirement plan, because it's going to change over time. And two, you know, it's a contact sport. Get out there and see people, get out there and learn about organizations and things of that nature.
In some ways, it can be just like finding a job. Go and have lunch with people who are doing interesting things.
Yeah.
And see if there's any possibility of joining them or working with them, or see if they have ideas about other people to talk to. I mean, that's a job search skill that is really important to have, and it works in retirement as well. Going out to lunch with people is another really nice thing about retirement.
I've got a friend who retired a couple of years ago, and he tried to explain it as a kind of like a 5 or 6 burner stove, you know, and you got the pots of water, and they're all kind of being brought up to a boil, and you're kind of controlling all of these. And those burners would be, you know, family, friends, faith, community, you know, maybe personal growth, what have you. And the idea is every week he wants to kind of sit down and have some activity in all of those areas. Call a friend.
Yeah.
The community thing is lagging. I haven't done much this year, so I've got to bring that one up. I got to do a little bit more there. And along the way, you become a bit more active. Along the way, you meet all kinds of very interesting people, many that might very well be like-minded. I think that certainly makes
a lot of initiative to do all of that. And too many people are watching television all day.
Yeah, right. I know in my own practice, we've, as far as change is concerned, you see that. You see somebody who's, well, this is the home we lived in while we were working, and maybe we downsized. Doesn't necessarily mean less expensive. Maybe we move somewhere because we're chasing the kids around the country. Maybe we decide we want to move to Florida, and then we decide we want to move halfway back because that's just way too far away. So there's all this disruption and change along the way as one is kind of working through their own personal plan, which is most important to them and their family and what they want to do.
Yeah, I think what you just said is important too, that it is important to do some planning and thinking ahead, but it's also just as important not to have a fixed idea of how it's going to go, to have a lot of openness and some things they want to try, and be open to the possibility that those things, everybody says to me, I'll say, what are you going to do when you're there? And they say, oh, we're going to travel. So they take a trip. And then what?
Yeah, been there, done that, cross that one off. Next. Right. This whole idea of it's a destination, which is so incorrect. It's the last fourth of your life or third of your life, and it's really more about exploration, exploring who you are, interest, things that you now have the opportunity, the freedom to really get involved in that you never had the ability to before. You're at a point now where kids are gone out of the house, hopefully off the bank account. You're independent in whatever that means to you, and as a result, you can do that.
It's a little bit like I've always talked about two parts of life where there's no roadmap. And when kids finish their education, whether it's high school or college, they know they're supposed to get a job, but there's nothing in their education that has prepared them for how to find that job or what job they want to do. And so in the 20s is when depression scores are the highest. And it's similar in retirement where there's no roadmap. It's people have to be motivated to figure it out on their own. And my husband says, he has 60 hours a week that he has to fill, and he goes about figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
That's how much time he used to spend.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think it does take a certain amount of initiative and as we keep saying, flexibility.
Well, those that are well-rounded probably have a better transition than most, but sadly, there are a lot of people who aren't. And we know that, retirement isn't just all puppy dogs and unicorns and rainbows. It's disruptive. I mean, you're uprooting work friends and colleagues. You just mentioned it with your husband. You're dismantling a routine that was essentially set for you that you followed for 30 or 40 years. So I'm sure that there are a number of emotional and psychological challenges kind of leading up to and into retirement. Depression, clinically, as you would define it, is a sizable percentage of population. I think today they're saying the National Institute of Mental Health says it's something like maybe 18% actively current population that are clinically depressed, but there are maybe as many as 30% that at one point or another, at some point in their life, were depressed or had symptoms of depression as well. And then there was a study about retirement specifically. It was a kind of a mega data analysis. I think it was the National Library of Medicine said that, almost a third, like 28% or so of retirees experience depression. Now, I'm not trained as a psychologist, and I don't quite understand the subtlety of that. To me, that looks like, well, if 18% of the population today is actively depressed, and this mega survey says 28% of retirees are somewhat depressed, then there must be potentially some triggering point of going from this secure, I've got this whole nother set of friends, I've got this workplace family, I've got everything spelled out for me and organized, to this complete uncertainty, as you said, that kind of causes this. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe what can be done to kind of help?
You know, I have a little bit of problem with that research, but okay. So I think depression in retirement depends a whole lot on whether the retirement was voluntary or involuntary, on whether they were depressed prior to retirement.
Right.
What their health status is. We know that depression scores over time get better and better. I mean, not depression scores, but life satisfaction, which is correlated with depression, gets better and better after the 20s up until about age 85. And then it starts to go down. And that's because people, by the time they're 85 years old, surely have health issues that are tough. Those data that you cited there don't, ask whether people are married or not. Married is a big factor in well-being in retirement and health. It also doesn't ask how people felt about their job, whether it was a good job or whether they were happy to leave it. And then it's a big factor too is what you and I have been talking about, which is these data don't ask anything about whether people have other things than work to do. And so it's a really complicated story. And I don't like to be the one that talks about how retirement itself is depressing. It's possible that there are factors in retirement that lead to some depression. But most people in retirement are really happy, just like your brother-in-law.
Hear that, folks? Nothing to fear. Nothing to fear with retirement. Let's, as we're kind of winding down here, let's bring this a bit closer to home. So I imagine there's also some getting used to and reshaping kind of daily plans, as an example. And this I've heard multiple times from my clients. My client's an engineer, very thoughtful, very methodical. Math has to work. There's logical reasons to do whatever. And he may be leaving an organization where he was in charge of 200 or 300 engineers, big job, big responsibility. Everybody looked up to him as the decision maker. Retires, and he's now entering, and we'll consider a kind of a traditional household where we have now a spouse who's already retired or has always been kind of a homemaker raising the family, and that's her world. And she or he is the king of that kingdom. And all of a sudden, this engineer who has all the time in the world is starting to question, gee, Jackie, why do you organize the utensils this way? Or wouldn't it make more sense to have the larger packages down below in the pantry? Why are we doing what we're doing? Which has been perfectly fine because it went unnoticed for 30 years. And it creates some animosity. It creates some anger. And I've literally had clients in my office who would say, I just want you to know, Joe's got to get a job. He's got to find something to do. He's got to get out of the house. So that's got to be an issue as well, where everything worked fine. And now this retirement thing comes into play, and it really becomes a bit of a people stepping all over everybody else's toes. So how does that work out?
Yeah, there's actually a word in the literature about that. That's called husband intrusion.
That sounds sexist. I'm just putting that out there. Yes.
Yeah, I do think that it requires, especially if it's a traditional household, where the roles have been so clearly defined that they have to be redefined. And what one contributes to the household may have to be reshuffled. And if it's the wife who's been home in the traditional role, she might have to learn to accept a contribution from the husband that doesn't meet her standards, but that is
very judicious.
So they do have to, couples do have to anticipate an adjustment. And I think it's really important that both continue to have their spaces, things that he does by himself, things that she does by herself. They need to do a lot of joint planning. One of the couples I talked to said, I told him we're not having lunch together. We don't do lunch. You do yours, I do mine. It's whenever you want to go, come, we go and come as we please. So it is especially complicated, I think, I think retirement itself is complicated for men in particular who have been king of the castle in the workplace and at home because of the responsibilities of their job. That's really hard. And I think that's something that might require intervention.
So the takeaway is it's best to have these types of conversations and kind of think about what the future might hold in store with respect to some of these roles and actions well before the event, right? Interesting. Okay, I have one final question. I appreciate that. I could talk with you for hours on this topic. I just find it so interesting, and there's so many other things we could have gotten into regarding what employers are doing. We touched on it a little bit in terms of mentorship, but so the last question, and I don't think we discussed this, and I don't mean to throw a zinger because that's not the intent, but I think you alluded to the fact that your husband's now retired, and I think you're retired as well, at least from Boston College. So as somebody who has studied this whole intersection of work and retirement, and now you're an active participant, was there anything that you were surprised with that just didn't go as you thought it would, that might help some of our clients who are at some point or another facing these same things?
It's funny that you asked that. One of my colleagues from the University of Kansas, I believe, and maybe you should look this up and send it out to your clients. But it's
okay. We'll put whatever it is, Danielle. We'll put it in the show notes, so we'll make sure it's available.
I studied retirement for 40 years, and then I retired. And one of the things he talks about is getting accustomed to paying ginormous amount of money for our health insurance. And universities have really great health insurance policies,
right?
And he's finding that there were lots of things he was interested in, but he didn't want to get deeply involved in any of them. He was that place where when I was saying earlier that I wanted to tip my toe in the water, but I didn't want to. And that's what he talked about, is really enjoying the freedom for a while. I mean, the university professor life is very demanding and stressful. You have to get grants and write and research and teach and be on committees. And so he was really enjoying that, and he was enjoying being with his wife. And he said that's the biggest reason he retired, was to have more time with her.
Yeah.
And
beautiful.
for me, I haven't been. I think I've been surprised at how much I've enjoyed it.
Okay, fair enough.
Because I really am devoted to my work. I'm still involved in it. I have a paper that's coming out this week, and doing things like this and writing op-eds, which I've done a little of, and I have kept my toe in my work world, and I still go to my professional meetings and stay in touch with my friends to the extent that I can. But I have a rich community here. I have a very exciting and wonderful book club. I have a a group of walkers. So we walk every morning, and my husband and I really do go our separate ways all day. And
exciting.
so I've enjoyed. I think that I've been mostly surprised at how much I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. One thing I hear often is somebody says, "Wow, if I knew it was this great, I would have retired earlier."
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you kind of feel the same way a little bit? Maybe
I do. No, I don't think I would have done it earlier. I really was glad to be able to work until I was 75 years old. And then I had a grant that ended, and the program that was funding that particular grant closed. So there wasn't an option to get another one. So I kind of felt forced to retire. I was one of those involuntary. Okay. But it also had run its course, and I was ready. Mm-hmm. And I have these 3 beautiful grandchildren too.
Beautiful. Hopefully they live close by, so you can see them often. Close enough. Good answer. Very good. Yeah, we find ways to get to them, right? Yes. Very good. Well, listen, Jackie. This time has flown by. I think we're 50 minutes into the interview, which is just it's amazing. You're a wealth of knowledge. You're a beautiful person. So much fun to talk to. I want to thank you very much for taking the time out. I know it's just one more obligation that you committed to, but I sure am appreciative that you did for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, Jim, I'm sorry. I want to get a commitment here for a second episode. This was really great. It was fascinating stuff, Jackie. Thanks so much. And I do hope that Jim gets you back.
We'll see. I'll work on it for sure.
Great. All right. Today, we explored a side of retirement planning that's really overlooked. As Jackie emphasized, we need to invest in other life-fulfilling aspects just as much as we do in our financial security. We are more than just our money, people. This episode is just the beginning of understanding this major life transition, and we hope you found the conversation insightful and that it encourages you to explore more deeply things that make you happy and how you can enjoy a fulfilling retirement. And again, Jackie, a big thank you to you for sharing with us. Please be sure to subscribe to the Retirement Engineer podcast so you don't miss future episodes, and follow @Kaydan Wealth on social. Let us know what you think in the comments. And please share topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. Following and sharing this podcast helps our small show make a larger impact.
Thank you for listening to The Retirement Engineer with Jim Kruzan. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.kaydanwealth.com or give us a call at 800-638-6900. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of Jim Kruzan and this episode's guests, not necessarily those of Kaydan Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.